The Round Table Conference 1930-1932 and Government of India ACT 1935, its importance in freedom struggle. The Round Table Conferences were a series of discussions held between 1930 and 1932 in London to address the constitutional reforms in British India. These conferences involved representatives from the British government, Indian political parties, and various communities. Let's explore the perspectives of Mahatma Gandhi, the Indian National Congress, and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar during these conferences, along with examples and their impact on the national movement. 1. Mahatma Gandhi's perspectives. Gandhi initially decided not to participate in the Round Table Conferences, as he believed that the British government's proposals did not adequately address India's aspirations for self-rule. He emphasized the importance of non-violent civil disobedience as a means to achieve Indian independence, advocating for the rights of peasants and workers. Gandhi's absence from the conferences highlighted his skepticism towards the British government's sincerity in addressing Indian grievances without conceding to the demand for complete independence. Example: the Salt March of 1930, initiated by Gandhi as a protest against the British salt tax, overshadowed the Round Table Conferences and demonstrated the potency of non-violent resistance in mobilizing the masses against colonial rule. 2. Indian National Congress perspective. The Indian National Congress participated in the Round Table Conferences with the objective of securing greater autonomy and representation for Indians within the British constitutional framework. Congress leaders, including Jawaharlal Nehru and Motilal Nehru, presented the Congress demand for dominion status and a constituent assembly to draft India's constitution. However, Congress rejected the British proposals for communal representation and separate electorates, viewing them as divisive and detrimental to national unity. Example: the Congress demand for dominion status laid the groundwork for India's eventual independence, as it established the principle of Indian self-rule within the British Commonwealth. 3. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's perspectives. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar represented the Dalit community at the Round Table Conferences and advocated for their rights within the broader framework of Indian constitutional reforms. He highlighted the social and economic discrimination faced by Dalits and emphasized the need for affirmative action measures to address their grievances. Ambedkar's participation in the conferences underscored the importance of Dalit representation in the discussions on India's future governance. Example: Ambedkar's insistence on reserved seats for Dalits in legislatures and government institutions laid the foundation for the inclusion of affirmative action measures in independent India's constitution, such as reservation policies in education and employment. 4. Impact on the national movement. The Round Table Conferences failed to achieve consensus among Indian political parties and the British government, highlighting the deep divisions and conflicting interests within Indian society. While the conferences did not lead to immediate constitutional reforms, they provided a platform for Indian leaders to articulate their demands and aspirations on the international stage. The failure of the Round Table Conferences contributed to growing disillusionment with the British colonial administration and strengthened the resolve of Indian nationalists to intensify their struggle for independence. Ultimately, the Round Table Conferences underscored the need for a negotiated settlement between the British government and Indian political parties, laying the groundwork for future discussions and agreements leading to India's independence. Conclusion. In summary, the perspectives of Mahatma Gandhi, the Indian National Congress, and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar during the Round Table Conferences reflected diverse interests and objectives within the Indian national movement, ultimately shaping the course of India's struggle for independence and the evolution of its constitutional framework. Government of India ACT 1935. The Government of India Act of 1935 was a significant piece of legislation that shaped the constitutional framework of British India. It introduced several reforms aimed at decentralizing power and increasing Indian participation in governance. Let's explore its detailed provisions and outcomes, along with examples. 1. Provisions of the Government of India Act, 1935. Federal structure. The Act proposed a federal structure for British India, dividing powers between the central, federal, government and the provinces. Bicameral legislature. It established a bicameral legislature at both the central and provincial levels, consisting of an upper house, Council of States, and a lower house, Legislative Assembly. Diarchy in provinces. The Act introduced the system of diarchy in the provinces, dividing administrative functions into transferred and reserved subjects. Elected representatives controlled transferred subjects, while British appointed governors managed reserved subjects. Franchise and electorate. It expanded the electorate, albeit still limited by property and education qualifications, and provided for separate electorates for various communities, including Muslims, Sikhs, and Anglo-Indians. Central Executive. The Act established a Federal Executive Council headed by the Viceroy, with a mix of British and Indian members. Provincial autonomy. It granted increased autonomy to the provinces in matters of administration and legislation, empowering provincial governments to legislate on a wide range of subjects. Emergency provisions. The Act included provisions for the declaration of emergency by the Viceroy, granting the central government extensive powers during times of crisis. 2. Outcomes and impact. Increased Indian participation. The Act expanded the scope of Indian participation in governance by introducing elected legislatures at both the central and provincial levels. Provincial autonomy. The introduction of provincial autonomy provided opportunities for Indian leaders to govern their regions and enact laws according to local needs and aspirations. Strengthening of nationalist movements. The Act's provisions for limited self-government fell short of nationalist aspirations, leading to continued agitation for complete independence. Communal representation. The Act's provision for separate electorates reinforced communal divisions, leading to increased polarization between religious and caste groups. Centralized control. Despite provisions for federalism, the Act maintained significant central control through emergency provisions and the Viceroy's powers, limiting the effectiveness of provincial autonomy. Preparation for independence. The Act served as a precursor to India's eventual independence by providing a framework for governance and political participation, albeit within the British imperial structure. 3. Examples of impact. Provincial governments. The Act led to the establishment of provincial governments with Indian ministers, such as the Congress-led ministries in provinces like Madras, Bombay, and United Provinces, which enacted progressive legislation and initiated social reforms. Communal tensions. The Act's provisions for separate electorates deepened communal tensions, as seen in the rivalry between the Congress and the Muslim League over representation and power sharing. Emergency powers. The Act's emergency provisions were invoked during World War II, leading to the suspension of provincial autonomy and the imposition of authoritarian rule, which sparked opposition and further fueled the demand for independence. Conclusion. In summary, while the Government of India Act of 1935 marked a significant step towards Indian self-government, its provisions and outcomes were complex and multifaceted, shaping the course of India's struggle for independence and the subsequent evolution of its constitutional framework.